Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes a todos. I'd like to start off by thanking Vance Martin for the invitation to come to this event. Vance, I'm always amazed by how you manage to pull these congresses together, how you have over the past almost 40 years, and what you actually achieved through them. And Nature Needs Half is yet another one of these ideas, these concepts that was born at one of the WILD congresses. So I always like to start off with a non-human primate photo. This is a golden lion tamarin from Brazil. I've spent the better part of the last 40 years running around the rainforests of the tropical world looking for these animals. But I'm not going to talk about primates today. Rather, I want to talk about changing the scale, which I think is at the heart of this whole concept of nature needs half. I'm going to talk about the critical importance of protected areas, no mystery there. And I want to give some examples of some of the huge commitments that are being made that are enabling us to change the scale in different parts of the world, particularly in the Pacific Oceanscape and the Guiana Shield region of northern South America, and then touch on this very important concept of indigenous and community-owned conservation areas. And I'm going to end talking about one thread in particular that I think we need to address while we're here at this Congress. So, Nature Needs Half, as soon as I heard it back in the Iucn 4 years ago, I thought, what a wonderful idea. But I have to say I was a bit pre-adapted to it already, because in 2001, 2002, we did a global wilderness analysis, which was published in a book entitled Wilderness, which we did with Patricio Roblesil and Cemex. And in this book, we identified 37 wilderness areas around the world, and 19 of these had less than one person per square kilometer, very low human population density. And these 19 areas occupied nearly 40% of the land surface of the planet, which is already fairly close to that 50% target that we have. This is a huge area. This is equivalent to the size of the 6 largest countries on Earth and has less than 1% of the human population in it. But it's not just about size, it's also about the quality of the areas that we're setting aside and protecting. And that brings about the importance of the hotspots concept. This is a concept that was invented by Norman Myers back in the late 80s. We've now identified 35 of these areas. This is where they're located. I think most of you are familiar with this concept already. Original extent of about 16% of the land surface of the planet, almost 90% lost over the past 100 or so years. Only about 2.3% remaining. And in this very small area you have as endemic species at least 50% of all plants. And if you want to look at the most endangered species using the Iucn Red List, which by the way in November is going to be celebrating its 50th anniversary, you see that for the vertebrates, between 80 and 90% of the critically endangered, and vulnerable species are concentrated in this very small land area. Madagascar is the classic example. It's a place where I spend a lot of time, and the lemurs are really the flagship group for Madagascar. We're now at 105 species. This is already out of date, this slide. 100% endemic, and most of the plants and animals that you find there are somewhere between 80 and 90% or even 100% restricted to that island. Unfortunately, most of Madagascar looks like this, and if it's not in a protected area, it's going to be gone within the next 5 years or even sooner. This brings up the critical importance of protected areas, and the more I've seen of the world, especially in the tropics, the more I'm convinced that we have to make a major effort to create more protected areas and to ensure that those that exist are as well managed as humanly possible. They're simply our most effective tool in preventing further biodiversity loss and in providing ecosystem services that are so essential for our own survival, and which really are becoming now the basis of the new vision of sustainable development that recognizes natural capital as being central to long-term human well-being. Now, of course, when we talk about protected areas, we have to talk about the Aichi Targets, and particularly Target 11. We had been pushing in Nagoya a few years ago for 25% of land and 15% of the oceans as the targets for 2020. We weren't quite successful. We saw 25% as kind of a midway point for Nature Needs Half. We only got 17% as the target for terrestrial, up from the existing roughly 13%. Wasn't terribly ambitious, but better than nothing. On the ocean end, we did a little bit better. We went from 1%, less than 1%, which is where we were in 2010 to a target of 10%, which is an order of magnitude change, and that's a little bit more ambitious. So in terms of some examples of changing the scale, how are we doing? Well, I'd like to highlight two major regions in particular. We've been pushing very hard in the ocean realm this concept of seascapes, working in a wide variety of different areas. The eastern tropical Pacific, centered on the Galapagos and some of the other island systems off the coast of countries like Ecuador and Colombia, Costa Rica, Panama. This is a 2 million square kilometer area, quite extensive. But the really exciting one now is this Pacific Oceanscape out in the Pacific region. It's about 40 million square kilometers. This is about 4 times the size of the entire United States, including Alaska. And in this region, we've seen some incredible developments over the past few years through the leadership of the countries and the territories in this region. There's about 16 or 17 island nations and overseas territories of Europe and the United States that are really taking a leadership role. In particular, I'd like to highlight what's being done by the country of Kiribati, tiny country in terms of land area, only about 800 square kilometers, and yet its ocean area, its EEZ, is about 3.5 million square kilometers. On the left there, you have the president of Kiribati, Anote Tong, and on the right, Greg Stone, who's the head of our science and marine program. A few years ago, President Tong created a 407,000 square kilometer, not hectare, 407,000 square kilometer marine protected area called the Phoenix Islands Protected Area, and that was declared a World Heritage Site a couple of years ago. It's now the largest and deepest World Heritage Site in the world, and just last week we jump-started, we created a trust fund for this area of $5 million, which we hope to grow to much more over the next few years. And I'd just like to emphasize here the great importance of this World Heritage concept. I love the World Heritage concept. I think it's a critical element for us. I think it's still under-marketed and undervalued in the world as a whole, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about the importance of the concept during this presentation as well, during this Congress as well. Not to be outdone, the Cook Islands, which is even smaller terrestrially than Kiribati, I think it's about 200-something square kilometers. It created a marine reserve of 1.065 million square kilometers. That's bigger than many European countries. And also not to be outdone, New Caledonia is about to declare the Coral Sea Marine Protected Area, which is 1.5 million square kilometers. And again, I'm emphasizing I'm talking about square kilometers here, not hectares. So add a couple of zeros to those to that number to get to the number of hectares. This is an area that's roughly equivalent to Alaska in the United States, an enormous marine area. So this has taken us from less than 1% in terms of marine protected area coverage back in 2010, when the target was set, to almost 3% now. And we hope that we can continue this kind of action, really change the scale of marine conservation in the next few years. On the terrestrial end, we have the Guyana Shield region of northern South America, which is without a doubt the most intact and most pristine tropical forest area on the planet, centered on the border areas between Suriname, Guyana, French Guiana, southern Venezuela, and the northern part of Brazil. Fabulous area. I met, many of you know Creighton Arsenis. I don't think he's here yet. I think he's going to be at the Congress, though. I met him at Rio Plus 20 last year, and he said, I'm interested in roadless wilderness. And I said, okay, let me show you some real roadless wilderness. And about a month or two later, we went to Suriname and Guyana. On his first day in the forest in Guyana, he saw a jaguar, which was really amazing. I've only seen 4 jaguars in 40 years, so I thought that was a very good sign that what he was trying to accomplish was a very positive thing for the world. This is the situation in the Guyana Shield region in 2001. Green represents protected areas at a state or federal level in these countries, and pink are indigenous lands. And look at what's been accomplished over a little more than a decade. Here you have the situation in 2006, with a lot of action taking place in Brazil, but in other areas as well. And here's where we are right now, 2013, and looking a little beyond 2013 as well. This is a phenomenal, enormous area. Much of it is still intact and in very, very good condition with very small human population. So if you want rainforest wilderness, this is really where it's at. My favorite country in this region is Suriname. I've been going there for almost 40 years now. This is the greenest country on Earth. It's 94% covered in intact forests. No other country can match that. And not surprisingly, it also only has 500,000 people, and it has the highest per capita water availability of any country on Earth. Very high biodiversity and intact biodiversity, as you might expect. And back in 1999, working with the government, we succeeded in getting a protected area created called the Central Suriname Nature Reserve. That's 1.6 million hectares. Jim Thorsell, whom many of us know well, did an assessment of this area for World Heritage status, and he said it was the most intact area out of the 600 or so sites that he had assessed for the World Heritage Committee, the most intact site he had ever seen. And of course, it became a World Heritage site within a couple of years, and we now have a $16 million trust fund in place for this site to maintain, to pay for recurrent costs. We're now working with the government of Suriname to create another major protected area, this one about 2 million hectares, and this time they want it to be seen as a water reserve, protecting the water reserves of this country, the water resources of this country, and looking at the potential for having water markets in the future. We're not quite there yet, but we hope in the next couple of years we're going to be able to see this area declared as well. And this one is even more pristine than the Central Suriname Nature Reserve. No one in it, no gold mining, an absolutely amazing area. Now, the superstar of Nature Needs Half is, without a doubt, the state of Amapá in the northeastern corner of the Brazilian Amazon. This state is already at 73% coverage in protected areas and indigenous lands. Most countries, most states can't possibly achieve this, but it does show what is possible if a region, if a state, if a country has a particular vision. And in fact, Amapá is thriving economically. Very important as well is this concept of indigenous and community-owned conservation areas, which really was highlighted for me in a major way last year at the Convention of Biodiversity meeting in Hyderabad, India. And indications are that perhaps 13%, 12 to 13% of the planet is already covered in these indigenous and community-owned conservation areas. So if you add that to the goal of the CBD, which is 17%, we're looking at roughly 30% already. So again, Nature Needs Half is not overly ambitious in my opinion. Now, the really strong area for indigenous territories is in northern South America, particularly the Amazon. And I'd just like to highlight one group in particular where we've been working now for 22 years. I think Barbara Zimmerman is in the audience somewhere. Well, I know she's here, but she was the one who brought us into working in this area, working with these wonderful Kayapo people who occupy an area of about 11.5 million hectares in the southeastern part of the Brazilian Amazon. About 20 communities living in these small villages, about 6,000 people, and we've now succeeded in getting them a $10 million trust fund to enable them to continue to conserve this wonderful area that they live in. Because I can tell you for sure that everything else surrounding this area has already been converted to cattle pasture or soybean plantations. Now, I'd like to end just talking about threats. We know a lot about the threats that are out there, but I'd like to highlight one in particular, because just in the past few weeks, this one has really hit me in the face as being an enormous problem that we need to deal with very soon. You know what this is? Oil palm, exactly, palm oil. This crop is rapidly taking over Southeast Asia. It's moving into Africa, and it's also moving into South America at a pace that is almost impossible to imagine. It looks innocuous. We eat it or smear it on our faces every day in various forms. It's a very rapidly growing crop, so It produces economic benefits very quickly, high density of product per unit area. It starts producing after 3 years. It lives for 25 years. But really shocked to see how quickly it's expanding and how it's even invading protected areas in countries where you think they would know better. We just did a television program for a new series called Years of Living Dangerously about climate change with Harrison Ford. We spent about a week and a half in Indonesia looking at the impacts of oil palm and other activities and the levels of deforestation. It's moving rapidly into these peat swamp forests of Kalimantan. These peat swamps have 10 times more carbon storage than your average rainforest, more than an Amazonian forest, and yet they're being drained and converted as quickly as you can imagine. This is a scene from a national park called Tesonilo in Riau province in Sumatra. It was created by the Indonesian government with WWF in 2004. It's now 80% gone, with a lot of the destruction having taken place in the last couple of 3 years. Now, Harrison was really very upset when he saw this, and he let the Minister of Forestry know about it, and now there are actions taking place to reverse this, but 80% of it's already lost, so in spite of there being a moratorium from the government. So this is frightening, and I would really like to see us take a position here that there should be no more clearance of natural forest for oil palm plantations. We just did a declaration about that at a Great Ape Summit that we had in Jackson Hole, Wyoming last week, and I think if we, again, re-emphasize that in this Congress, it would be very effective. There's plenty of degraded land already available, and you can do intensification of oil palm where you can produce as much as 3 times more per unit area than is currently the case in most places. So we really need to take a stand on this. So I think I'll end there just by saying I love this concept of nature needs half, but I think we have to be a little careful not just to be talking to ourselves. We need to convey this amazing concept in a way that's going to capture a much wider audience, and maybe we also just need to make the point that people need half as well, that we as a species cannot survive or thrive if we don't protect half of nature. So thank you very much. I'll leave it at that.